Okay, when you muted us, you muted both the sound and the video. I just turned the sound back on.
Okay. Hi, everyone. I just want to introduce myself. My name is Liz Garrity. I'm the Executive Coordinator at COABE. Our mission is to inspire educators so adults succeed and communities thrive through leadership, professional development, advocacy, and communication. Welcome to our May 15th, 2019 webinar, Another Option, Competency-Based High School Diploma for Adults. We want to just share with you a few things that we have going on. We have the COABE Journal Prison Literacy Edition that was just recently released, and we're already accepting new submissions for our next COABE Journal, and it's going to be on leadership. So you can look for that coming out sometime later on this year. We offer over 50 webinars, including our Manager Mondays series. We've garnered over 18,000 participants nationwide. So make sure that if you are a member, you're taking advantage of the free professional development. We want to talk a few minutes about our Educate and Elevate campaign. It's an award-winning campaign. We have 100 new legislators plus in the House alone, and we've also got $156 million in proposed cuts to education, adult education. So our legislators really need to hear from you. If you go to the website down at the bottom of the screen, educateandelevate.org/take action, you'll get a really great, easy way, 3 quick clicks, and you can contact your legislator and they can hear from you. You can also submit success stories. You can recognize adult learners, workforce partners, and state innovations that your program or organization is currently working with. At COABE, we are a convener of partners. We have 42 national partners. We also have 47 state partners, including 23,000 active members and 65,000 plus contacts. Many of our national partners actually include these new workforce partners, Marriott, Tyson, U.S. Chamber of Commerce, Skills USA, Amazon, Google, and Alliance for Freedom, Restoration, and Justice, to name a few. We've got some exciting things going on with these workforce partners in the near future. We also want to let you guys know about an Adult Career Pathway Festival. It's going to be in Miami, August 6th through 8th. It's kind of a neat idea. It's put on by Minds That Move Us and the Institute for Educational Leadership. It's a little bit like a Shark Tank kind of approach, and there's teams, and I hope that's enough to spark your interest. You can go check it out on the COABE website or on the Minds That Move Us website. We have a new partnership between Google and COABE where you can share adult learner success stories. You can sign up to be a Google trainer. You can access information on free Google boot camps at your state conference, and you can take the adult education survey. So that is also at educateandelevate.org and /Google. It's great. I actually just went out and facilitated my first boot camp as a trainer in Maryland. It was a great experience. So there's a lot of exciting things going on. We want to get you more excited too about our next year's COABE conference. It's going to be in Baltimore, Maryland, and it's April 5th to the 8th. We'll be staying right on the water at the Waterfront Marriott. It's a beautiful place. Today's webinar presenters are Anna Mary Fitzgerald and Stephen Sadlier. I hope I said it right. And they are coming to us from Washington State. And I'm going to stop sharing my screen and I'm going to turn it over to them.
Well, hello. I'm Anna Mary Fitzgerald.
And this is Stephen Sadlier.
And this is a presentation that we gave at COABE in Phoenix, Arizona last year.
Right.
So we've modified this a little bit so that we can fit it into the hour. Our plan is to give you a little bit of background about how we came up with this and why, and how our program is structured. the central piece of it is the meat of this presentation. At the end, there'll be some resources for links to our state program, to our curriculum specifically, and how to contact us. So if you have questions as we go, specifically about the presentation, Liz is monitoring. If there are questions that you have sort of structurally or philosophically, we encourage you to look at the material that's linked at the end, and we're available for questions through email or regular snail mail. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. So the centerpiece of what we're offering here today starts with the prior learning assessment.
Oh, you're going.
Should we start? So why don't you go?
So here's the quick overview. High School 21 is a competency-based high school diploma program available to students who are 21 or older that have aged out of the K-12 system. This past legislative session made some changes so that we are able to serve students that are 18 to 20, but this program was designed for adult learners. Our state responded to the privatization of the GED and the new test that was released in 2014 by allowing its community college system to develop a competency-based alternative to that GED or HiSET or other programs. Each school developed their own program based on the needs of their school, but needed to coordinate the graduation requirements of our Office of the Superintendent of Public Instruction so that all of our outcomes aligned with their outcomes, but would be in a competency-based rather than a seat time model.
So essentially, we're a Washington State high school at a community college, but being competency-based, it allows students to draw from prior, particularly as they're adults with experience, draw from prior work and personal experience through a life history document, which we'll get to garner some of their credits, though not all.
So we start with their high school transcript, and whatever credits they've already earned, they get to keep. So if the high school would allow that for graduation, B or higher, we accept that. We don't second guess the school system at all. The next piece is a prior learning documentation. Right now, it's predominantly a written narrative structure, but students have options of other ways to present their experience and accomplishments. And then whatever credits they still have left, we have curriculum in our program that they can show what they know.
This also includes international prior credits on high school. So we make a specific effort to honor prior learning in regular, ordinary high schools and sometimes middle school credit, no matter where it happens. And from that, after that, then we get to our prior learning narrative documents, as Anna Mary mentioned.
So this slide is just kind of going over that high school transcript. In Washington State, we had legislative changes that happened about what the graduation requirements were following 2009. So we have multiple tables of which credits are required for which graduation years. As Stephen said, we do accept out-of-state transcripts. We accept from accredited and non-accredited private, but that also requires, especially for non-accredited, it requires additional supplement to see that the outcomes are aligned with Washington State. With international, we have a tremendous linguistic variety on our campus to help us translate that, but there's also some really good online resources, and I've listed a link to the one that we use most commonly, called Class-Based. It helps with transcripting what courses are called in other countries and give us an idea of what the equivalency is. in Washington State, 1 credit equals 1 year. So if another state has a different structure, we try and create a translation conversion.
So just to reiterate a couple of points, so this is for us to be able to get to do this prior learning document. Students have already gone through garnering prior credit in their transcripts. And it also involves us being aware of and following whatever legislative changes happen, and also being in partnership with the state board of public instruction. So when we get to this prior learning narrative, it's not just something that we're sitting down and saying, okay, what do you know, and trying to piece the pieces together. There's a lot of layers that allows us to get to this part, the prior learning part.
So at the end, when you go into our curricular materials, we have a crosswalk document that looks at what the state public instruction office requires and how we look at life experience and work experience to crosswalk that. So we wanted to make sure you knew that that piece was in existence, and that's the guidance that we have not only for our faculty, but we also share that with the students so that they can see how we're working in a really transparent way.
So a student comes to us and walks in that first day, and we've gotten everything. We're ready now to start looking at the
overview.
I'm sorry.
So this is just the overview document. We're going to get into the deep dive of how the prior learning document works. The overview is we start with a brainstorm. We help the student develop and expand supporting details. And when appropriate, we polish that composition for English. This prior learning document becomes a piece of their transcript. So this, in Washington State, the records retention is 75 years. So that's another piece that we're transparent with. It's not just what the student says they did. We also document with supporting materials that can include certificates, state employment records. If they're from out of state, Social Security employment records. We can also get letters of confirmation for the employment and/or letters of recommendation that all supplement this narrative of accomplishment. And then, as we said before, once we've evaluated the high school transcript and the prior learning, if there are still credits that they need that haven't been demonstrated elsewhere, we have online self-paced course modules in the individual subject areas. We expect the students to attempt all of the assignments, and we expect that they'll have an overall score of 70% or a C for passing. The student does have the ability to revise the work to show competency, and the assignment grades become their transcript record for that module. But the experience is only in one of our units or in one of our class offerings is it online. Otherwise, the students are sitting in a classroom working individually at computers, but they have each other in this social network. We do have the science lab credit is set up to be group work because it's the only credit option where the students work with each other as part of the curriculum. There are 2 labs to earn a full credit. We offer 6 labs in a quarter. We also have 2 online options, both for the online class and for students that their schedule doesn't work to attend one of those labs. The students get support from the instructor in the class, but there's also a social community that gets built where the students support each other. And we also have robust learning labs on our campus that are available both online and in person. So once the student comes to us, the first thing that we do is figure out what credits they need after their high school transcript has been reviewed.
And we sit with them and we identify, first of all, we let the students know that when they do their narrative, that the narrative ends when they've expired the credits that they're going to get. So even though we're asking them to sort of step away from what they may assume at that point is that this is what learning is, this is what formal learning is, and we're actually going to be able to give them credit potentially if they've handled cash or if they've done measurements for math. It's only in terms of what credits they need. That's the framing of it. So we have to figure out that in dialogue with them. It's a very teaching heavy, even though most of the documents are online and students can work independently. It's very teacher heavy in terms of creating the knowledge, because the students have very oftentimes have never thought of their prior work and prior personal accomplishments as something that's genuine knowledge. So part of the process is that students become aware of through conversation with us and sometimes each other, that a certain thing that they know how to do may correspond to what Washington State offers in terms of credits for graduation. So that involves our conversation. And then the students get down on a piece of paper, what are in chunks. Everyone goes a different way. I may have a student write a paragraph about your work with taking care of an older relative who has mobility issues. And through getting those pieces down on paper, we can start to then identify it with, crosswalk it with credits, and have them develop the language that makes it come into the level of competency rather than just simply a list of what they do. So part of part of what makes it difficult for students is, first of all, is that all of the students to be in this class, students have failed. The students have been institutionally not successful. So there's oftentimes a resistance for them to share initially. So, and not only is there a resistance, but there's also a lack of awareness that this is true knowledge. So these experiences are things that we're trying to link with credits, make them become aware of it. We also provide models of what other prior learning assessments, what other narratives other students have done, and use that as a template, develop sort of the literacy, both at the line level of describing through active verbs. What does it mean to apply care in this given circumstance? And it's more than anything, it's about revision. And that's like working in with a lot of our other, some of our other contextualization goals of the college, is that the students go back and revise and come to greater understanding and greater elaboration of their prior experience. And we also, because we've had students make up stories, we ask for other artifacts that show that they actually did the work. So for example, W-2 forms or a work transcript from Social Security. All right, so you're seeing an image of a town in, it says 2008, but it looks older than that. So if this is prior learning, for a given student, it is like this. It's part of their general field of vision. And where do you start with a field of vision that's full of depth, a field? It's full of places you can go. It's full of rivers in the front and buildings in the background. So part of our work with the student is to say, this is your experience. It's as rich as this. Your experience is great. We're going to try to have you foreground aspects of that experience so that you can render those into competency. So your prior learning. So from this, we go to this. And it's a modified narrative chosen set of aspects that the student has to bring forward so that they can come to their credits, come to their 19 or 20 credits for diploma requirement for Washington State, for our state. So going from the field of the real world as it is to a world where the pieces are created, crafted, juxtaposed, and narrated. That's, in a nutshell, in a sort of symbolic nutshell, that's our work. prior learning assessment. So one of the conundrums of the project that we have for us here is, how do we award science credit when we're ourselves not scientists? Or how do we understand carpentry as math? And maybe we know the math, but we're not carpenters. So for us to be able to be in that role of gatekeeper, and in that, as we mentioned before, the co-witness, the person who, through conversation with the students, helps them come to realize and help them come to narrate competency, we have to have a little bit of a paradigm shift in terms of how we see expertise. And the student is the expert and we are the novice. And not just in a sort of a genuflection toward constructivist theory, but an actual document creation way. So if the student is a carpenter and they want to make a case for getting math credit, which they know because we've talked to them about that, it's still not enough that they say, well, I was a carpenter for a year. A year is 1 credit, as you explained. They say that to us. We say, well, imagine me. I'm the instructor. I'm your instructor. Imagine if I'm someone who knows nothing. I've never met a carpenter. I've never seen carpentry. You have to explain it to me. You as an expert, you have to apply that knowledge into the way that you put your sentences together so that I can understand that that's math. I can understand that your measurements correspond to competent carpentry skills. So you as an expert have to bring that forward in the way that you explain. Just like we saw the image of the landscape in the Alps. There's the image of real life as a carpenter, but then there's also the image that's sketched and that's created and that's crafted. And as an expert, they have to come to that point, to that level of simplifying and rendering for them to show expertise, and for us as novices to be able to then continue to work with them and to prompt them to create more detail and to connect the student experience with some kind of creditable area that we work with. That's a paradigm shift that we had to start with. We have to work with on a face-to-face student-to-student level.
So when it comes to working on writing this narrative, the student and the instructor have a relationship where they're working together to brainstorm their experience and accomplishments, discuss which subject areas it might apply to, and also to say, this is great experience, but you've already earned that credit, so we don't need to go into detail. And then talk about what details of their experience help them show that relationship between experience and the subject area. But there's also a dynamic happening in the class that's student to student. Students hear each other talking with the instructor, and they start talking about their experiences, both work and personal. So it's community building, but it's also helping students articulate to each other what they're trying to articulate to their teacher. It also pushes them to discuss the skills that they've developed, and they kind of prompt each other of where did they learn that skill? Did they do certificate training or a STARS training or a variety of other things that have been outward manifestations of competency? But also just kind of what do they do day to day? How do they parent? How do they manage health issues, whether chronic or emergent? So there's that piece that goes into it, just trying to figure it out.
And so unexpected outcomes, as Anna Mary was saying, one of the things that happens, even though it's a private document, it's between the student and us, the way that the class emerges is very different than in other areas where students, for example, are just doing test preparation. Because there's so much about the creating of the language, even the chunks of language, and what's considered a reasonable thing to write about. Students are in conversation with each other. But before that starts, one of the things that happens most often is that the students who have spent time working basically on the seat of their pants to some degree with synthesizing information and balancing what they know with what the work that they're doing, they've never really thought about it as being skillful. They've never seen themselves as, I do this work, and this is, and the amount of the kinds of adjustments I'm able to make as a someone who works in customer service. For example, my ability to handle an unruly customer gets better with experience, and they're able to sort of diffuse problems as they go along. And they've never thought about that in many cases until they start to talk to us first, and then second, they start to actually put it on paper, and they come to understand themselves in the classic, genuine, constructivist, experiential learning way, that they are an individual with skill. And that, of course, leads to, and that enthusiasm and energy leads to a social awareness of a community of people. So in one of my classes, there's a student who wants to do a Facebook group for all the graduates, because it was so important, even though he was on his own pathway for his credits on his life experience, which is very different than others. He saw that as a space that he wanted to continue beyond the class time. And used to team teach with the same group. And I will say that humor and joking was a key part of the way that social environment worked, in part because it's frightening in many cases for students to come to terms with the fact that they didn't finish the last time that they were sitting in a seat similar to that. We're also, part of what happens socially also is through us and through peer interactions, the students figure out how to do school, you know, in the sort of the critical literacies way of being a schooled individual. How do you navigate the other parts of school? So part of our model is if a student needs to do the FAFSA to get federal aid, they do the FAFSA in class. And we make it clear that that's something that they can do in class. And then that student then becomes a resource to the person who's sitting next to them. And any of the other campus services or community services are things that we allow when space provides for that classroom to be a social space for developing those and ways to navigate those services to become a better schooled and better work ready individual.
So we wanted to dive in and give you some samples. These are taken directly from final versions of the prior learning assessment document. We try really hard for the student to keep their voice in the document, but we're also helping the student try to polish this for English credit. We use the same rubric that is used in the GED for English assessment, and we also use our internal rubric for placement at the pre-college and college level. So we are guiding students to that college level proficiency, but it is not mandatory for this document for them to achieve it. So we just wanted to give you you know, 8 or 9 examples so that you can kind of see what the students are producing. This first slide was a student who was looking for math and science lab credits. A little bit of background about her. She dropped out in the 9th grade. She worked at a dog boarding facility and then later as a vet tech. And this is showing how she manages medication for a diabetic dog. So we were encouraging her, show your math. What kind of conversions were you considering? But also, because it's science lab credit, what scientific issues are you trying to apply in the world? In this case, you know, an appropriate amount of insulin so that the dog is healthier and not injured by over-medicating or under-medicating. And then just walking through that process. I'll give you a few seconds to read through it. I know that this will be available for repeat viewings, so I won't spend too much time on these slides because I know that in future viewings you'll be able to stop and rewind.
So we're going to our second snippet of student work. And CWP is Contemporary World Problems, which is basically a social science credit. And so this particular student was a primary caregiver for her grandmother at 14. She dropped out of school. She had 2 children of her own by the time her grandmother died when she was 20. So this particular person would be writing more about personal accomplishments. And so part of, even before we get to writing it, is the student to become aware that a personal accomplishment, even if it wasn't a paid position, in this case, carries with it credits. And so for a student, like for this particular student, we focus on things like the verbs, the actions taken. So for example, I handled pills so we sat with her on her bed. So acted. So some of this also, in the way that we present the active verbs, is for job training. So if a student's experience is in caregiving, even at home, it's really important to start to develop active verbs that show competence, not just, for example, doing it because you're mimicking somebody else doing it or doing it because you must do it, but doing it for purpose, doing it, observing the cause and effects, and to do that through the conceptual active verbs, as we see with this particular student here. And so psychology is one of the potential areas for this particular credit, CWP, which is a Washington State credit.
Here's another student sample. This is math credit. In Washington State, if you were a freshman after 2009, you are expected to have Algebra 1, geometry, and either Algebra 2 or some sort of career or technical math credit. In this case, the student actually was a freshman prior to 2009, but I thought it was a great example of how do you bring in those geometry and algebra equations. This student dropped out of school in 10th grade because he was restless and bored. A carpenter he worked with showed him how to calculate the material. So he had a mentor that showed him how to do this and to develop those math skills, some of which he had coming in, but his work with a calculator and keeping track of these measurements so that they could order the appropriate amount of materials. His goal is to open up his own mechanical garage and to be self-employed. So we're always aware of where the student goals are, but we also, in part of this conversation, open up the world of what the possibilities can be. This student is clearly got a lot of skill. And he and I did talk that academics is a route that he could continue to be successful in, but recognizing that his goal is to own his own shop and be self-employed, his body may not be able to do that his entire career, and just reminding him that education is always an option for lifelong learning.
And so part of the conversation is for us, we're diagnosing, we're having a diagnostic conversation about where a student is going. And we're honoring the things that they want to do with their lives. We're also sometimes challenging them to think about other possibilities. And the only way we're able to do that is because we make the commitment to continue to diagnose and continue to engage with the student And not, while we don't track students toward workforce or academic, we shape the way that we expect them to write, or the way we expect them to present their knowledge, based on where we think they're going. So that is an ongoing aspect that's not necessarily visible in how these documents came to be. But Anna Mary's example with the last student is a perfect one, where you're leaving it open for the person to continue to segue into higher ed if that's what they choose. This particular student that you're reading here, for science credits, she was in special ed education throughout school, primarily for behavioral issues, and she dropped out her junior year. Majority of her work experience was food service and home health care, and this here shows she applies knowledge from her on-the-job training. So working with something like bed sores. So for getting science credit is oftentimes about the system, understanding how a system works, where laboratory science would be how you test out your hypotheses about avoiding a diabetic dog, to get sicker and to hopefully to get better. Science credit is something that, in the conversations with the student that we have, is about their ability to see how a system works, how the parts of that happen. And so with healthcare, if the student is able to understand what's happening in the body, the anatomy, even if it's real life, even if it's not book knowledge anatomy, but that's something that potentially could go for science credit, as we're seeing here. And things like cleaning, cleaning can also potentially go, depending on how the student articulates it, for health credit. But to understand the way that germs and microbial life works, and how cleaning interacts with that and shapes that, is something that can go towards science credit, as we see here.
So here's a student who had pretty limited work experience. It was mostly in food service. This was after many weeks of really trying to draw out a narrative about work experience. This student dropped out of school after his sophomore year. He has only had food service work experience, and came to us looking for more education so that he doesn't have to keep doing that and have other work options. And this is really just showing how he applies the knowledge from his food handler's card, which was a certificate of supporting documentation to this. So it's not enough to just have earned the food handler certificate. We want the student to show how they apply that knowledge that they were tested on. So this is how it applies at the restaurant that he worked at. Meat temperature, cold temperatures, why that's important, how sanitizing can help prepare or prevent cross-contamination. So this is an example where the student is pulling out as much information as they can think of to share, and it might be limited. In this case, in the last sentence, he said he practiced sincere, kind, and friendly customer service, which could also count toward the CWP credit, which is a general social sciences, which can include sociology and psychology principles. This sentence alone is not enough to grant him that credit, but it's a place where that student can start thinking more about other examples of how do you not only provide customer service, but what is your awareness of the social interaction that's happening and how they're anticipating expectations and needs of their customer.
So this student here dropped out of high school when she got pregnant at 15, started as a housekeeper in an facility, and she wants to move into medical assistance. So that last piece about wanting to move into medical assistance work, that may shape the way that we engage in this conversation, because it may mean that it's not just about getting help in science. It's about being able to speak about how something works and how your action is competent action involved in that particular task. What I see jumping out at me here is this term, this high-risk touch areas. So in a conversation with a student, it may be that when they start to write what they did as a housekeeper in assisted living, is they just make a list of the things that they did, and I may go to them and say, so these are things that I would see on your job description on a page, but it doesn't show me anything about how you know how you're doing what you're doing and why you're doing it and what are the effects of this activity. So oftentimes the second draft or even a third draft, the student will come up with a term like high-risk touch area, and that will be the pause moment for us to think through that. And I may say to them, I have no idea, as your instructor, what a high-risk touch area is. I wouldn't know what one looked like. I wouldn't know how to respond. If I were new on the job and you were training me, what would I need to know? Talk me through it. Describe it. Talk about it as if I know nothing about it. And that often helps the student to be able to not just simply make a list of their activities, but talk about them through concepts. Develop a concept and use analytical language and make concluding ideas about what are the implications of it. So there are some higher order thinking that comes into this, and it often comes through the drafts. It often comes, and it'll be prompted by us in the case of the student, knowing that they're going toward this as a field of competency later in life. So maybe the bar that we're going to set for them is a little higher in their ability to apply college.
And you're also just seeing excerpts from a much longer document. The prior learning assessment document at a minimum is at least 3 pages. This one was probably about 15 pages. So this is a small section of her description of her activity in housekeeping and assisted living, but there are multiple pieces and points of evidence that support these credits throughout the whole document. We just want you to see how the student writing looks, how they're talking about their competency in these areas, and kind of show a sampling of how life experience can translate to credit experience. Here's another example. This is a student who dropped out in 10th grade because it was just easier not to go. He currently is supporting his family in part by buying, restoring, and reselling Air Jordans. That's his favorite shoe. He is interested in doing other shoes, but his goal is to become a distributor of those refurnished shoes. The kind of detail that he went into, a lot of his learning came from mentors that are doing this and his own research, a little bit of trial and error, but he is at the point where he can probably provide about 70% of his family's needs. His partner also works full-time and they have a growing family, so he wants to have more options that a high school diploma will grant him access to. But here's another example of a student who has bright and resourceful and has a lot of academic potential. Whether or not that's his goal right now is not really the issue. It's just having that conversation with him about what his options are based on his interests, his experience, his skills, and where the application of all of those can get him farther in his own goals.
So now we're moving on to physical education credit. For a student who calculated the physical exertion she spent each week by tracking it with her phone. She surprised herself and had a greater appreciation of why she was tired. So earlier we had mentioned, Anna Mary had mentioned that at present, students are primarily writing through formal paragraph structure their prior learning assessment, of which this is an excerpt. Sometimes there are students that we will discuss the possibility of doing alternative modes of representing knowledge, and physical education might be one where, when we go to our next phase of this program, where we help the students develop a video project. In this one here, the way that the student is actually tracing out what they're doing and noticing the distance and noticing the amount of exertion might lend itself very well to a multimodal way of representing. So while we're spending a lot of time with talking about this in the formal narrative way, we're going toward multiple alternative assessments, and this may be a good case. And part of the reason for that is, while we were also having the students develop the language and the awareness through writing and through also the digital literacy skills, because that's another component. Many of our students have never sat for extended hours in front of a keyboard, and so they're getting those skills. But one of the other cognitive learning skills is the skill of elaboration, and stopping and at one moment, one flash point of their, in this case, physical education experience, going back to it and becoming aware of how much effort is actually going into it, and what are the implications of that. In this case, coming to terms with the amount of the 25 miles walked per week, and the corresponding feeling of being tired, and understanding that what she was doing wasn't just what she did because she had to do it, but it involved physical education, and involved her learning, in this case, learning about what that means in terms of what are the physical demands to carry out this job, and how does that bear on her own physical life. And so using this document sometimes can be a good tool for reflection and then elaboration. Those two great words of the new brain-based learning theory, or how learners go from being more competent.
So we're nearing the end of our presentation. Additional resources, these two links might answer several of the questions that are in the chat. The Community College High School Diploma Granting Authority is through Washington State statute. This is a link to our Washington administrative codes, specifically 180-51-053. This grants the community colleges in Washington State to grant a high school diploma. So when students go through our High School 21 program, they receive a high school diploma, not a diploma certificate, the way that the GED is. We do have community-based organization partners, and some students will start in those programs and complete their High School 21 with the community college, or depending on their contracted relationship with that community college, they may also be able to grant those diplomas as a proxy of the community college. Each community college has different relationships with their partner community-based organizations. For our school, the community-based organization partner that we have can start the students. They can earn some of those transcripted credits for coursework, but the diploma granting authority comes from our community college. If you'd like more information about Washington State's high school completion options, this is a link to our State Board for Community and Technical Colleges that gives you overview information, and there are a lot of other links to statewide resources. I see that there's one question about what is the cost for the program. We charge our students a $35 fee per quarter, not per class, and the students can remain in the same class up to 3 times. And we have 2 class item numbers for 2 different levels. So a student could potentially spend up to 6 quarters in our high school 21 program. We've discovered that between 40 and 60% of our students can complete this diploma in 1 quarter or less. Some students, a small percentage, probably between 5 and 8%, do need more than 3 quarters. So that's how that is allowed.
And we also do have, we do for high need students, we do make scholarship money available on a student-by-student basis to reduce the $35 cost.
We have tremendous support from our school's foundation, and there is a fund set up specifically to help with both tuition fees, and if they're doing the GED, to help them with the pre-tests and the tests themselves. And Kevin Foley asked, if a student has previously taken GED tests, can those also be considered when showing prior learning? Yes, those are the same as a high school transcript. So it's a transcripted document. They don't need to talk about it in their prior learning assessment, but it does need to be the 2014 or later test, and the scores need to be that 145 or above. And you'll find out more information about that on the State Board's webpage. This is how you can get in to look at our curriculum. This includes not just the guidance for writing the PLA, which is the prior learning assessment. It's also the modules for the competency-based education in the subject area. And it also has different modules for ourselves as faculty, guiding the students through this, links to other resources, ways to look at prior learning and how it connects, but also if a student has this type of background, which course is best suited for them. Math is a great example. Depending on if the student had an IEP in high school, we can consider that as part of their credits. There is something in Washington State statute that says if the student has this in an IEP, career or technical related math can go for all of their math credits, and they are exempted from the algebra and geometry requirements. Although career and technical math tends to incorporate those concepts already into a practical application for a technical education. When you log in, be sure that you use this full login, spsec.instructure.com/login/canvas, and then you'll be prompted with a username or a password. The username, we've got 10 available, so no more than 10 people at a time can be in the class. And you are in that class as essentially a teaching assistant, so you can see all of the material. You can click through the quizzes and the assignments. You can see the rubrics, but it also prevents you from taking these quizzes so that we have to grade them. So you can see any of this. We developed this with in mind of open educational resources. So part or all of this material is available to you. There are frequently links to other open educational resources. We encourage you to please explore these. If it's still not enough, Stephen and I are available to you for further questions. Here are our emails. Here's where we're located. And because we have a few minutes left, I wanted to look through the question and answer chat and make sure that we can answer what questions are available. Liz can answer the question about when the PowerPoint will be available as that webinar. There's a question. In the beginning, you said that each community college developed its own competency-based program. Are others similar? Is there any document summarizing all of them? How long can students stay in the program? I think I answered that last question. Each community college developed theirs independently. Our program is the most competency-based. A lot of schools are still have wedded together subject areas like science, contemporary world problems, and English with a math component, but they're still married to seat time. Students are still attending that joint class 5 hours a week for the quarter before they can earn that credit. Some colleges have decided that their outcome is students must be college ready before they meet the graduation requirement for English and math. We felt very strongly that there are students graduating high school now that do not meet college readiness in those areas, and we don't want to set a separate higher standard for our students in college than those that are graduating high schools in our state. There is, as far as I'm aware, there is not a document that shows a parallel construction across the 34 community colleges in our state, that all 34 colleges offer a version of High School 21 on their campuses or online. We also have a partnership with our regional library system so that students can go to the library to do their coursework, especially for the rural counties where that travel is difficult. There's a question of what online coursework is used. I encourage you to come back here to look at our Canvas shell and kind of muddle around in there and see if your questions are answered. If they're not, please email Stephen or myself.
I would say that a lot of it is scaffolded, right? At least partly done by remote access. So students, even during the prior learning assessment, we're providing information to them through our Canvas pages. So even the ones that are pen and paper, seeing pen and paper students sitting down, there's support that we use and we purchase the students in how to use through web-based resources.
So students have access to the curriculum wherever they have an internet connection. We do expect there to be regular attendance in the class because we tell the students we need to demonstrate that we are serving you. So we are taking our attendance with you rather than your attendance with us. There's a question, are these examples the entire PLA narrative for one credit, or was there an expected number of words, paragraphs, or amount of content? The quantity is not as critical as the demonstration of competence. So there is not an expected, 600 words to earn as science credit. And it's not expected that all of the science will be lumped in one section of the prior learning narrative. However, if the student is earning English credit, their document must be at least 300 words, which is pretty easy to get through. And it also needs to meet that rubric for competence.
And I will also add to that it's coming back to the idea that we tell the students that it's not the fact that you did it that you're getting credit. It's that your prior learning assessment is an argumentative document in its way, showing that you've made a case, a credible case for you earning that credit. So it is on a case-by-case basis, but they have to persuade a reader who doesn't know them that their abilities in physical education or in science is credibly linked to a case for competence in that area. So it's a slightly vaguer answer, but.
There's also the question, how can they stand up to auditing for justification of credits? Do these students have to take tests and basically test out of the courses they are getting credit for? No, it's competency-based, so there are not tests. The demonstration of understanding. So for the auditing question, this narrative document that is then annotated by the instructor and by our transition specialist, which is basically our internal advisor. we annotate these and create a cover sheet of how the credits were distributed. And then the entire document becomes the transcript. So that if anybody is questioning, you know, what's happening with the student's demonstrated skill, it's an incredibly transparent document. We are in the same town as the Evergreen State College, which is a state school that since its inception in 1967 has used narrative transcript, evaluative documents to show student competency. And for this piece of our high school diploma, it's a similar model. Because each community college is able to grant its diploma, the school trusts that the instructors who are giving that credit are competent to do so. But because it's not one teacher teaching a subject area that they are the experts in, because the student is the expert, we have multiple eyes on this, and we have this transparent record-keeping model.
And the last thing I would say on that is it's very rare that students get all their credits from the prior learning assessment. And so, for example, math is something that we, out of hand, don't award all credits for. And if we know a student is going toward a math-intensive course of study later, then that is also, we know that they're going to be taking tests. We know that there is external evaluative models. And that's something that we support them with. And we suggest the certain math modules that they'll do separate from the prior learning assessment that gives them the experience and knowledge that allows them to handle those tests.
Hi guys, I just want to say we're at the top of the hour, so I want to be respectful of people's time to start and end on time. We want to thank you so much, and I know that you guys provided your email addresses, so if anyone still has questions, you can email Anna Mary, and Stephen. And also, I will send the presenters a report of all the questions, and so they can look and see if they missed anybody.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. It was a great afternoon. Thank you for spending some time with us.